Hello and welcome to episode 10, Neuroscience 101. In this episode, we dive into neuroscience. In the last episode, we set aside a question that came up. When I go and get myself a glass of water, isn't there a subject who takes this action? Isn't that an independent agent? Benjamin Libet conducted a series of experiments that became famous. It showed that participants watching a clock and asked to press a button at a specific point showed a spike in their EEG showing their readiness to press. But this spike happened much before they reported being actually conscious of taking action. This shows that our story of I did X happens after the decision to act has been made subconsciously. So let me say this again using different words this time because this point is very important. A decision that was made at a subconscious level without an awareness of it is subsequently reported much later as I did it. So, who is acting or what is acting? The next neuroscience experiment I want to tell you about is called the split brain experiments. In certain patients, especially epileptic patients, neurosurgeons decide to surgically separate the right and the left hemispheres of the brain to minimize the severity of epileptic seizures. In all of us, the left eye is connected to the right hemisphere and the right eye is connected to the left hemisphere of the brain. Our right and left hands are similarly cross connected, right hand to left hemisphere and the left hand to the right hemisphere. In split brain patients, if you show a picture to the left eye, the left hemisphere will not see it, and a picture shown to the right eye will not be seen by the right hemisphere. Researchers showed a chicken foot to the left hemisphere and a snow scene to the right. Now they asked the subjects to pick out picture cards from a selection, and this time both eyes were open. The bizarre result is the patient's right hand picked up a card with a chicken and the left hand picked up a shovel. The language capability is in the left hemisphere, and when the researcher asked the subject why they picked up a shovel with the left hemisphere, not having seen the snow, made up a story that the left hand picked up a shovel in order to clean out a chicken shed. Once again, I want to make sure you got this, so let me tell you what's happening once again using different words. The right hemisphere saw the snow, and so it directed the left hand to pick up a shovel. But the left hemisphere did not see the snow, and but the left hemisphere is the one that's doing the explaining. And it has to find a reason why the left hand picked up a shovel. Because the left hemisphere had only seen a picture of a chicken foot. So now the left hemisphere, under pressure to explain this incongruent action, makes up a story saying that the shovel was picked out in order to clean out a chicken shed, even though there was no chicken shed anywhere in this whole series of events. This leads us to two conclusions. First, it is very easy to split the so-called self into two pieces by surgery. So, where is this indivisible self that we feel we are? Second conclusion, our explanations for what we do don't need any facts. We make up stories to explain anything we find inexplicable in our actions. This was our point in the earlier episode. There is no you in there. What is there is an ability to tell stories. Even normal people in normal conversations often speak as if they are split personalities. For example, you may have heard someone say, I am upset with myself. In this sentence, is there an I who is upset with someone else called myself? You will realize that in speaking in this way, that person has suddenly split themselves into two. There are many other sentences that, if you think about it, are exactly like this one. We have an intuitive feeling that there is an I who is like a controller inside the body. This controller thinks thoughts and makes decisions to act. The reason that we feel this way, like a split person, and we use these kind of sentences, is that there are occurrences which happen without our willing it, and we know it. For example, you cannot decide whether you will sweat or not sweat, whether you will feel thirsty or not feel thirsty, whether your hair grows or does not grow. So there are many things that are going on without you deliberately willing it or deliberately controlling it. And so, because we intuitively recognize this, we feel that there are parts of our selves that are just happening, but our narrative self makes up a story to explain it. Neuroscience tells us that even your thoughts and stories are just arising and passing, and a narrative capacity explains it, giving rise to the illusion of an actor inside. As we have seen in an earlier episode, the story of this actor has been changing all through your life. Because the narrative picks up the stored memories, we have the illusion of a self that has remained constant over the years. When these memories are impaired or destroyed, as in dementia, the actor evaporates. Even in normal people, memory is highly unreliable, as is well known even in eyewitness accounts of crimes told in court cases. Once again, all these may seem disorienting, terrifying even, but it actually can be very liberating in two ways. First, we can recognize it as a story and reduce the suffering that some stories cause. We need not be entangled, trapped, and stifled in stories. We can craft new stories that lead to greater ease. The second way in which all this is liberating is a corollary to the first one. We can also be less judgmental of others because we can see that they too are telling stories. We can be more equanimous when we hear the stories that others tell about us and take great care when we tell stories about others. Our brains impose patterns, fill gaps, or cut out and edit in order to tell these stories. And so we can recognize their imperfect nature and be more discerning and even more forgiving. Let me tell you about one last neuroscience study for this episode. It is called the Scar Perception Study, conducted by psychologists Robert Kleck and Angelo Strenta. They applied a false scar on the faces of participants. After participants saw themselves in a mirror with the scar, the experimenters told them to go out and mingle in their daily social interactions. Just before the participants went out, the experimenters, under the pretense of touching up the scar, surreptitiously removed it. Participants therefore went out believing they had a scar, but in reality, it wasn't there. When they returned, they described how people stared or behaved differently or treated them differently. This shows how something that is just an internal false belief altered the perception of how they were treated, although nothing at all had actually changed. I'll leave you to think about the implications of that one. Let's summarize. Point number one, there is no indivisible self. It can be easily divided by separating the two halves of the brain. Point number two, what is actually there is an ability to tell stories, a narrator module. Point number three, there are parts of us which act independent of our awareness and or volition. Point number four, the narrator module's main purpose is to explain. This explanation even ignores gaps in information and or memory. Point number five, knowing that we are storytelling gives us power over our own stories. We need not be entangled in them, nor do we need to treat others' stories as ironclad truths. This leads to greater care in telling stories, receiving stories, and greater compassion for all beings because we recognize the great fabrication we are all entangled in. Your practice for today is a little different from the kinds of practices that I've been taking you through in previous episodes. The practice is merely to become aware of the internal chatter in your head, the voice in the head, as it is sometimes called. As you go through the day, if you keep paying attention to that voice in the head, you will actually recognize that you almost have no control over it at all. It just keeps chattering away. That is the narrator module. And that narrator module is constantly telling stories about yourself, your actions, your future, your past, others' actions, their futures, their pasts, and so on. It is just a voice. And even when you externalize that voice by speaking aloud, either to yourself or to someone, it is still just a voice telling stories.